for coming to see me. I know that the other two speakers giving talks right now are awesome as well, so I appreciate everybody picking me. Hopefully this is working. As we get started, I'm just going to ask some questions so I can kind of target what I'm doing to what you folks are expecting. So I'm just wondering, like, how many of you out there have actually used cloud computing technology at all? So maybe half. How about using it at your company? So you've actually deployed something of business value on the cloud. So half of that. Okay, so that's good. I know this is the technology track, so how many people actually came to my talk expecting to see hands-on, me hacking some cloud technology today?
As long as it has agile elephants in it, yes.
Yeah, okay. So you won't see any elephants, and also no, there won't be any code or hands-on tech in my talk, even though we're in the tech track. So it's an agile talk, even though it's called cloud computing. So my goal today is really to share with you all kind of the synergies between cloud computing and agile. And I think a lot of people who not use cloud computing extensively are mostly thinking about cloud computing as a tool. So just like any other sort of tool in your technical toolbox, but I actually think it has a bigger impact on the agile community than that, and I'm going to try and convince you guys that that's true. So this talk is really about why you should use cloud technology. It's not going to be about how to use cloud technology. But if you are interested in how to use cloud technology, there's plenty of other places to go to find that out. Not only online. I think here in Vancouver, there's a Vancouver DevOps user group now, so that might be a great place for people in Vancouver to go. If you're from Calgary, like I am, there's a Calgary DevOps user group as well. So just getting that kind of introduction out of the way the talk's going to go is I'm going to tell you guys a bit about me. Michael gave me a quick introduction, but I just want you to know kind of where I'm coming from. Then I'll kind of explain, why and how I learned to love the cloud. Kind of where my experience in the cloud is coming from. Then I want to talk about how specifically using cloud technology makes you and your company or your organization more agile. And then maybe talk a bit about how would you build a cloud-based organization? What would that look like? How would it be agile? How would it not be agile? And then maybe at the end some discussion, networking questions. By the way, if anyone wants to interrupt me at any time with a question, as long as I'm not running behind schedule, I'll totally let you ask. If I'm getting behind, then we might have to catch up a bit. So quickly about me, like Michael said, my name is Kris Read. I work for ThoughtWorks. ThoughtWorks is a pretty well-known consulting company. Some of the things I do, I'm really interested in lean technologies, lean startups. I was actually out here for the Lean Startup Agile Vancouver conference that Michael did, I think last fall or earlier in the spring. May, yeah, it was in the spring, right? So I was out here for that. I spent a lot of my time talking about and researching cloud technology as well, so I'm really interested in that. I helped start the Agile Method user group in Calgary, and I co-founded Calgary DevOps, which is sort of my latest thing. So those are kind of my passions: cloud, DevOps, Agile, and lean startups. So if you like any of those things, then you'll probably like where this is coming from.
Did you make that picture yourself?
No, I stole it, but it looks just like me, right?
A little bit.
I actually just searched for like geek avatar on Google Images, and that came up, and I was like, oh my god, it's me. So I have to just say a little bit about ThoughtWorks, since ThoughtWorks sends me to all these events. I know it maybe is a little of social faux pas to talk too much about it, but basically, who's ThoughtWorks? We're a company that offers consulting services and custom software development. If anybody's interested in consulting services or custom software development, definitely come talk to me. Also, if anyone's looking for work, we're hiring. There is usually an expectation that you'll be willing to travel to different client sites in different cities, but we're looking for Vancouverites right now. So if you're developer, or in QA, or some other role, and you think you might want to work for ThoughtWorks, come talk to a ThoughtWorks person afterwards. Okay, So now into the talk. So the first thing I want to kind of do is tell you guys a bit of a story about where I got involved in cloud computing, and I don't want to make this talk like an experience report talk. Actually, I don't like experience report talks. When someone gets up here and they're like, at my company we did test-driven development and it was awesome. Because you've probably seen like 50 experience report talks like that in the past. So I don't want to just keep talking about what I did at my company in the past, but at the same time I want to make this real, right? It's not just all like theoretical stuff I thought about on the bus. It's stuff that I actually worked on at a real company. So my cloud story kind of starts back in around 2008, and I actually joined a startup company, and it was my fourth startup company basically, so I'd been at a string of them, and they brought me in as a CTO, and it seemed like a great startup company. They said, we have an Agile team, we're doing Agile, and I thought, this is great, I can go to an Agile startup company, it's like the perfect job for me. And they had like 3-week sprints, they were doing all kinds of good practices, so they had like TDD, and they had a great set of tests, and they were sometimes doing pair programming, but I mean sometimes it's pretty good. And overall, I think a pretty good team. They had some beta users as well. My first day on the job, I found out that like all of their production services were running on like a Dell in like the closet of the office, and it was like a SaaS company. So that's alarming, right? Like imagine if you went to like Salesforce and your data was being kept on like some like $100 computer. So very, very scary thing to be faced with when I first went to this company. So right away, it was my first challenge in my first role as a CTO at a startup company. What are we going to do about this hosting problem? And where are we going to host this software? What kind of equipment do we need to buy? Well, we need an infrastructure plan to set all this equipment up. And how long is that going to take us to do and order all this stuff and set it up and get our production code working on it? And it needs to scale because we're going to get thousands and thousands of customers when our startup takes off. And how is it going to scale? And we need to keep really good uptime because people hate it when the site's down. And we need to keep the cost low because we're poor. So how am I going to do all this stuff? And then we didn't have any sysadmin people working at the company. We were just developers. And so I was like, oh my god, do I need to actually hack a sysadmin? Or 2 or 10? I have no idea. So it was really challenging at the time. I'm trying to figure out what to do about it. And then, it kind of hit me like a brainstorm. You know what? I can just use cloud computing and all these problems will go away. And I had no experience with cloud computing back then. And if you think back to 2007, 2008, most of the world actually didn't have much cloud computing experience back then. So I think very few people were on the Amazon cloud. If you look at the service offerings that Amazon offers today, for example, it's like 100 times more services than they offered back then. They didn't used to have any of the things like hosted databases and stuff like that. So cloud computing was kind of in its infancy, and what I knew about cloud computing was basically all wrong getting into it. I overestimated it in some ways. I totally thought that I could just have unlimited computing power with no effort, and that was maybe a bit unrealistic. But at the same time, I underestimated it in other ways. So, I kind of thought of it as computers that I could just use, and it's actually, I think, a lot bigger than that. So again, I was in this panic mode. I needed to make a plan and solve all my hosting problems, and I'd already done some estimates and calculations for a traditional, I need to hire 3 sysadmins, and this is how much they're going to cost. And then I need to buy a rack, and I need to get network connections, and I need to buy servers, I need to hook up the servers, and I kind of basically come up with this formula where if I plugged in all the numbers, number of users I might have in my first year, number of users I have in my second year, number of users in my third year, times the average CPU usage per user, and I just kind of work all this into this big calculation that would come up with a number, right? And it's like millions of dollars is what it would cost to basically create this server infrastructure to run this potentially promising startup company. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to be on the cloud, so I'll use the same formula. I'll just plug in the cloud values. And my expectation was that it would just come out cheap. So I could just basically, instead of getting 1 million, maybe I would get 100,000, and I'd be good. So I did that. I took the number of users I expected to have, I put that in. I put the cost per hour of CPU units from Amazon. I put that into my formula. And what actually happened was, A, it was actually more expensive to run on the cloud using my formula, and B, when I started running my plan past some people who'd done a little more research than I had, they were like, no, you're not doing it right. Like you're not thinking about cloud in the right way. It's not like hosting. It's not like getting like a GoDaddy account for your website, and it's not like leasing a server or renting a server. And why? Why isn't it the same? So I'm going to kind of go up to the screen here, but there's sort of two fundamental models. There's like the cloud model and the hosted or service or hardware model for building your infrastructure. And I've kind of tried to show it here. I actually stole this slide though, so I didn't make it up. But what basically happens is you're starting your project down here. And let's say that in your first few months, you expect to have 10,000 users, so you need to buy some hardware. Your getting started tax is basically the initial expenditure. Like you need to go out and buy a bunch of stuff and hire a guy, right? You need to put all that money up front in a traditional model. And that actually kills a lot of good projects. And it almost killed our startup company because we honestly didn't have the money to go and hire a whole bunch of people and build up all these servers. And that's why they were running it out of the closet. So there's that big getting started tax. And what basically happens is you pay this getting started tax, and then you start getting more users, getting more users, getting more users. Eventually your hardware is like outdated or it doesn't scale. And then you need to pay the tax again because you need to go buy more servers and go hire another guy. And so that's kind of where this stair step comes from. Every so often there's like this huge capital expenditure where you have to hire more people or buy new servers. And I was kind of modeling it based on that, and that's how my formula worked, right? Is I plugged in like the server cost and the person cost was like kind of the vertical axis here. But on the cloud, you actually don't need to put together this big getting started tax. Basically, you predict what your load is going to be, and you can actually just buy what you use, buy what you need. So, day to day, if you have 10 users the first day, you can just pay for 10 users worth of computers, and then if you have 50 users at the end of the first month, you can just be paying for 50 users worth of computing. So the cost obviously starts to become less because you're not paying sort of that differential in those stair steps. And then I started thinking about, well, if I buy hardware, it depreciates. But if I rent hardware on the cloud, like I'm not actually like losing money to depreciation, right? That's not becoming obsolete. And also, like if the price of cloud computing goes down, I'm just going to suddenly get a better rate right away. But if the price of computers drops, that doesn't help you if you just bought a computer, right? Like it basically screws you. Plus, you start getting a lot of bulk discounts on the cloud. So kind of the more machines you have, like the cheaper the rate gets. And that's not true always of hardware either. Purchase to purchase, you're basically not getting credit for all your past purchases. So if you go to IBM today and buy one computer, if you go to them tomorrow and buy one computer, they're not going to give you a discount because you're like a super loyal customer. It'd be nice if they gave you a customer loyalty discount, but they probably won't. And then, you can leverage market supply and demand on the cloud as well. So, like on the Amazon cloud, you can actually pay a rate that depends on how much demand there is. So, if a lot of people are using cloud computing that day, the price goes up a bit. But if not many people are using cloud computing that day, the price goes down a bit. So you can actually save money that way too. So there's sort of all these like hidden savings that I had no idea about on the cloud. And then there's elasticity. And I think everyone probably knows this about the cloud by now. But with a traditional system, you kind of have to like spec your hardware so that like when you hit your peak usage, like maybe everybody logs into your system at lunch, right? So peak usage might be 12 o'clock every day. 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock. You have to have like hardware that will handle the peak. But on the cloud, you absolutely don't need to have hardware that will handle the peak, right? At 12 o'clock you do, but at the middle of the night, you can actually scale back your cloud and save a ton of money. So like every night you can ramp down the usage you're using, not pay anything all night long, and the next day you ramp it back up again and pay during the day. So like on average, like if your usage model follows a curve like this, you can actually on average kind of pay for like half, right? And you basically like cut your costs in half. And a lot of companies, even if you have full usage all day long, like does your software get used on the weekends? We were building B2B software and it wouldn't get used on the weekends. So right away it's like 2 days out of 7 where I'm not paying for hardware, which is sweet. Okay, so what I learned from this whole exercise when I started looking in the cloud is that yeah, there's an obvious potential for cost savings, right? Even if the calculation I was using was wrong, there's sort of all of these like flexible factors and hidden savings that are going to save me money. But what else happens when you start looking at cloud? And after I did all this analysis, I actually started thinking that, hey, this is a really big deal. Like, this is changing the way the world works. And so I thought about how, back in the 1950s, that was when like computers were basically first being used. And companies actually couldn't afford computers back then. So if you wanted some computing time, you'd have to like go to some big company who owned like a computer. They'd own like one. And you could like give them some work and they would do it on their computer and then they would like return the results for you, right? As like a service. And back when these computers came out in the 50s, and I wasn't alive, so I can't verify this back then, but I'm told that like a lot of companies, they just didn't see, or they struggled to see, like, how can my insurance company benefit from this like thing called a computer that they've invented, right? They didn't really see. And it turned out that these companies really could benefit from this computer. And what they had back in the day was they had like a room full of people. It could be like this many people. And they had calculations where everybody in the room worked all day long. And at the end of the day, they like added up their numbers. And that was like the result. And they paid all these people to come up with that result. And it took like a full day of work to come up with that result. And when companies started outsourcing that to the computer company, right? First of all, there was a cost benefit. Just like kind of how I was talking about cloud, right? There's this like cost benefit. It's cheaper for the computer company to do it than for me to pay all these people to do it. And so initially everyone was like, jump on board, there's this cost benefit to computers. But what they found was the real benefit was agility, not cost. So for that insurance company, having that calculation done in 1 hour instead of being done in a day or a week, that was worth more to them than the savings, the cost savings they were getting. Basically, they were getting their data sooner, right? They were getting their data, higher quality data, right? Less mistakes. So it was fast and better, and they could use that to their advantage, right? And I think there's sort of a modern day analogy. The New York Times recently publicized, they actually used the cloud and they digitized their entire backlog, all New York Times articles. This is like 100 years of New York Times articles. And they did it in like a day, or like 2 days. And they said, we'd wanted to do this for a really long time, like basically since computers were popular, so a couple decades. But up until now, like, it would have taken them years of work, like literally years of work to make that happen. But they made it happen in like a couple of days with cloud computing. And so, again, with the New York Times, there's this like cost difference that they leveraged, right? And so like, oh, we got it so much cheaper now. But I don't think cost was ever their problem, or what they wanted wasn't a lower cost. What they wanted was like a fast time to market. So what New York Times wanted was to say, hey, we have everything online like today, in 1 day, and to announce that to the world and to get all this press about it. It offered them like, huge benefits. I mean, like, to be honest, New York Times itself doesn't benefit that much from having its catalog online, right? It's like it's a marketing thing. It's a usability thing. And so what I think, there's a quote from VMware that kind of speaks to this idea I'm kind of coming to, but you think about the business transformation first, right? In the case of the company in the 50s, or in the case of the New York Times, they think about like, what do they want from their business? Is this a marketing opportunity? How are we going to like leverage this faster time to market, or this sort of increased agility? And then they're going to sort of strategize, and then they're going to say, okay, can we do this with the technology we have? And I think that's what's happening right now with the cloud. Some companies are going to the cloud just for money, for cost, but some companies are going to the cloud for like business agility, for some competitive advantage, or some ability to like do things quicker and make decisions more quickly with better knowledge. So, what I'm going to talk about for most of the rest of my talk is that cloud computing lets you do things that you didn't think you could do. Or maybe things you thought you could do, but you can do them way faster now in cloud computing, with way less effort. And what that translates to for your business is agility. So like, what if you could put an idea into production in 1 day, So CEO comes up with an idea, what if that can be in the user's hands that day, right? That's agility. It's not lower cost, right? And what impact does that freedom have on your business? So, kind of to jump back to kind of my experience with infrastructure, I think everybody is doing it wrong in the infrastructure world. And we're doing it right in the software development world. Like Agile is getting mainstream now, but infrastructure is icky, right? It's like we're doing big design up front. Your sysadmins, a lot of the time, or your infrastructure teams, they're coming up with these like huge system diagrams, and they're doing all this upfront design. And they have to, because if they want to go buy the hardware, they need to know what they're going to do with it once it gets shipped to them, right? So they need to plan it all up front. They're trying to predict the future. They're adverse to unexpected changes, right? So again, if you order $1 million worth of hardware, and then somebody comes to you and says, hey, remember how I said 1,000 users, 5,000 users? You get a little upset because you just spent all this money on hardware, right? It's like non-refundable. So you're adverse to unexpected changes. You know, in the infrastructure world, you are trying to sort of fix price, quality, scope, time, all of them. You treat it as a cost calculation, and there's a very slow turnaround on new ideas in the infrastructure world. So I think this is pretty obvious where I'm going with this. But basically, like it sounds like the Agile problem all over again. We're just applying it in a slightly different place in the company. So I think when Agile got popular, right, and even now, it's about software development teams. Sometimes it's about IT organizations, but I think it's not well applied in sort of the infrastructure space. And if you start rethinking everything in that space, you start saying, let's not do upfront designs anymore. Let's not do these big purchases anymore. You know, let's get into a situation where there's not a lot of risk to making a mistake, and let's not make guesses if we don't have to. So it is just Agile all over again. But I think the question is not like, should we just apply Agile again to our ops team? If that was the problem, that's like a simple problem. Like everyone in the room would just say, yes, we should apply Agile to our ops team. Go home, do it. The question is more like, we want to apply Agile across our whole business, right? We don't want to just apply Agile on our dev team. And I know some other speakers here at the conference are going to be talking about this or have talked about this already. It's about like sort of the wider adoption of Agile. It's about sort of getting business agility, not just like dev team agility. And I actually think adopting cloud in your organization, it helps more than just your infrastructure team. It actually starts to drive agility into all of your business. And I think that what will really happen is you'll adopt cloud, you'll find that all of your IT is becoming more agile. And that includes your software development, includes maintenance, includes any sort of IT activities. And then eventually that's going to drive business agility in your whole organization. And hopefully I can back that up with some ideas here. Okay, so for this next part of my talk, you know, I just want to make it really clear. What is it about cloud computing that is so well aligned with Agile? Why does cloud computing and adopting it make your team or your IT department or your company more agile? So most of the stuff, again, it should read sort of like the Agile Manifesto. If you're going to adopt cloud computing in your organization, and this is what I found when I did it at that startup company, you need to kind of admit to yourself, hey, we don't know what our needs are right now. You need to admit, I can't predict the future. I can't actually fix time, quality, scope, and cost, all those variables. And you also need to admit to yourself, you know, our core competency is maybe not infrastructure. So in the case of the SaaS company I worked at, you know, we had software developers who were good at making web apps. They weren't awesome at infrastructure. A lot of companies actually have people who aren't awesome at infrastructure. Even if you're a bank, like your core competency, banking, right? You try and get good at infrastructure because you have to, but your core competency is banking. If you're a pharmaceutical company, core competency is pharmaceuticals. So you kind of need to like be really reasonable about what you don't know, and then try and start structuring your organization around this. And cloud computing, it necessitates this. You actually can't even get started with cloud computing, I think, until you admit these things to yourself. Because, again, there's sort of this fundamental shift in how you're paying, how you're modeling it, how you're predicting it, how you're planning it. that kind of lends you to these things. Cloud also helps you be more responsive. So, I mean, the whole point of cloud computing, get something into production sooner. As soon as you adopt it, you're going to find, hey, this is amazing. I can put a server up in 10 minutes. You can bring an idea to market quickly. So again, I want to test this idea out. I want to get some users on the system. I want to get some beta users on the system. You can do that in minutes on cloud computing. It took you hours before you used cloud computing. You can start testing your assumptions rapidly. Again, you know, how many of you guys have heard of like A/B testing? A lot of companies are doing this now, right? I heard Google. They actually, this is maybe just an urban legend, but I heard they A/B tested different shades of blue on their homepage, right? So they actually put up like different versions of the Google page, and they changed the shade of blue slightly. So like when Michael went to Google, he got like baby blue, and when I went to Google, I got like peacock blue. And they were testing to see like what made people click AdWords more or something like that. Like if the color suddenly changed, what would happen? And that's exactly the kind of innovation you can have in your thinking when it's easy for you to do that, right? For Google, it was like very small effort for potentially a payoff. On the cloud, you can do that kind of thing all the time. You can basically have a production environment. You can just kind of clone it and make some subtle change, and then test, hey, what happens if I send some users to that site? Very low amount of effort for testing out some assumption or some business idea. With the cloud, you also feel pain early and you fail early. So I'm sure a lot of people heard about the Amazon outage last year, right? There was like this big outage, and like tons of companies basically had no websites for like a week. I think that's actually an awesome thing for those companies, because they know exactly where they screwed up, and they shouldn't be, you know, hoping for underlying cloud infrastructure to fail. But at the same time, there were a ton of companies who were on Amazon's cloud who had no downtime. And actually, the startup company I helped build, they were in that availability zone, and on Amazon, they had no downtime. And that's because they actually tested every possible failover scenario they could think of on the cloud. And the cloud let them do that cheaply and easily. And so they were able to engineer a very robust system. They needed a very robust system. So you can basically bring that pain forward and figure out, you know, how are we going to deal with all these problems when they come up? And you can do it a lot easier than you can in a sort of non-cloud world, in an enterprise world where you have to buy servers or have huge investments in design and infrastructure. Third thing is, I think cloud really encourages iterative action. So, you know, as agile people, we're used to building features iteratively. You know, we'll have a storyboard and we'll do a sprint and we'll take 10 features and we'll do those. But could you build your infrastructure the same way? And the answer is yes, absolutely. You can add servers day by day, month by month. You can add machines to a cluster. You can put your database and your web server on one machine, then you can move it onto 2 machines, then you can move it onto a cluster of machines. You can actually sort of make a plan that slowly expands what you're doing in your infrastructure world. But that doesn't just apply to like the hardware. You can actually start applying iterative thinking to like non-functional requirements. Things like how reliable the system is. Maybe you want 3 nines of uptime, then you want 4 nines of uptime, then you want 5 nines of uptime, right? Well, can you do that incrementally? And can you basically like write stories and do sprints where you add a 9 of uptime every sprint? Well, yeah, you can. Cloud actually makes that fairly easy for a software developer to just add that just like they would add a feature. And that's not something that you could do in the past. So what's actually happening is it's sort of like automatically, as soon as you're on the cloud, it makes it so easy for Agile to sort of start to expand into other areas of your business. And it lets you be creative. So like being on the cloud, you know, you don't reinvent the wheel. You don't have to constrain your ideas so much. I think being on the cloud really helps companies start to see IT in a different light. A lot of companies see IT as a cost. I'm sure some of you even work at companies where they don't necessarily see IT as like their differentiating factor, the way in which they excel. You know, again, maybe you work at a bank. They probably mostly care about interest rates. But I think as soon as you're on the cloud and you start having this extra freedom, they start thinking, hey, we have all this extra freedom. What do we do with it? How do we differentiate ourselves from our competitors? What can we do that the competitor who's not on the cloud can't do? And this is like an excuse for people to kind of like start building value and doing, building competitive advantage that they didn't have before. And I know people looked at Agile this way too when Agile first came out, especially the early adopters, and it's like a second chance, right? For a lot of companies where they've done Agile or they've not done Agile or they've done a crappy job of Agile, they're getting this brainstorm again of, oh my goodness, there's all this potential. We can translate this potential into business disruption. What are we going to do about it? So what are some real examples? I want to talk to you guys about some real examples of like actual things you could do with the cloud that would, I think, improve your agility. And this could be on any project. So one thing you could do is you could clone an environment just to answer a question. So again, like in the what color of blue is best for Google's homepage question. On the Amazon cloud, for example, you could basically just copy your entire live environment, no matter how many computers were in it, and make it a slightly different shade of blue. You have that freedom, as long as you're willing to pay, and you're only paying for what you use, so how much is an hour of computing time? It's actually not that much. Some other things you could do. How about having unlimited pre-production resources? So I'll ask you guys a question again. How many people have been on a software team where something worked in QA, but then it didn't work in production? Does that ever happen to anyone in the room? Right? Like it always happens. But on the cloud, it will actually like not happen. You can actually, like again, bring up your production environment as a copy, build yourself unlimited pre-production environments, and test your code before it goes live. So you don't have this like, oh, it worked in QA. You can also do things like scale up or down based on economic conditions. And that's really something amazing for business. And it's hard to kind of come up with a scenario for it, but people are doing this all the time. So banks are a good example. They run calculations to do things like try to predict the stock market or analyze trends in financial markets, right? Because they want to basically gamble, right? They're gambling on the financial futures. So anyone who has like RRSPs where they've invested in some bank fund, they're trying to predict where that fund's going to go. There's sort of with unlimited computing resources, there's like a line at which it's cost effective to keep doing that calculation or not cost effective to keep doing that calculation. So a bank can decide, hey, if we add another few computers to this calculation, we're going to know more about, potentially know more about the future of this fund. But how much does that knowledge cost them? And is it going to pay off against, how much that fund is going to make them? So they're constantly sort of like doing this trade-off of invest more in computers to pay off with better predictions, but the cost of that, maybe not as much as the fund is going to make them, so they're weighing these things out. And the awesome thing about using the cloud is that you can basically make that happen automatically, make it happen for you, in any kind of line of business. You can actually start making a call about, is it even worth us doing more computation right now? Will that pay off for us? And an even simpler example might be performance. You could actually scale back performance, and maybe the system gets a little slower. Do you care? So maybe like at night, you scale back performance, and the system response is sluggish. But at night, people are working from home and stuff, whatever, who cares about them? During the day, you don't want your users to complain, so you could bring up performance, make the system snappy, right? And you'll have nobody complaining during the day. And that's a business decision you could actually make, and you could find out where is that threshold for my business, right? How sluggish am I willing to live with versus how snappy do my users really need it to be? And what's the cost-benefit analysis there? And that's not something you could do in the classical model. You can also leverage amazing cloud services in the real world. And so, again, you can go out there and just use a database in the cloud. Or you can go out there and use, this might amaze you guys, people have figured out how to send bulk emails on the internet, thousands of them at a time. And they have that as a service on the cloud that you can just use, right? So there are actually tons and tons and tons of cloud services you can just leverage in your app. And sometimes those things will be, mission critical to your app. So hey, we really need a database. But what's really the incremental cost of like maybe adding a few nice to haves, right? How many nice to haves are out there that you could have in your software package tomorrow? Wouldn't it be great if your app could send SMS messages? Okay, well the incremental cost of adding that on the cloud is much tinier. Increment just implement some interface on the cloud. Bam, now you have a gateway to SMSs. Doing that in your custom environment, in your closet or on your computer, it's next to impossible. And then, another real example is this idea of monitor-driven development. This is something we're kind of experimenting with at ThoughtWorks. So, we do TDD. So we build a test, and it fails, then we write some code to make the test pass. Well, let's take that back a step. In production, we monitor to see if services are running as expected. So if I have Facebook, they have a monitoring suite somewhere, some monitoring machines, and they're basically checking to see if different modules and features of Facebook are working properly in the production environment. And if one of them goes down or crashes, somebody's cell phone pager goes off and sysadmins are freaking out. So they have this monitoring system to make sure that everything is working properly. We can do monitoring-driven development. So if your company is going to build a web application, before you do anything, you could actually build the monitoring. And you could say, once this is in prod, and users are using it, I expect to see, this kind of performance. I expect to see this kind of response time. I expect, this URL will work. I expect this machine to return pings. Build that monitoring suite out first. Then start on your development. And you'll know your system is working when you put it into production and your monitoring is all green. And on the cloud, that kind of thing is actually really easy to do. So it's like giving you another sort of like, before I even start thinking about unit tests or acceptance tests, what are my infrastructure level tests or my monitoring level tests? So just to kind of bombard you guys with some facts that aren't based on me just having used the cloud at a startup company. There was recently a survey done by Absolute Data. They're like a market research firm. And they asked 600 decision makers. These are mostly executives and directors at major corporations. And they asked them tons of questions. 72% who had deployed something on the cloud believe that the cloud is the most essential thing in the agility of their IT organization. And they also found that any company who deployed in the cloud was 3 times more likely to be ranked better than competition in terms of agility, business agility. And they were ranking business agility on a ton of different metrics, but basically it's like how quickly can you respond to change, right? That's kind of the classic, the agile. And so there's actually data coming out of industry now that supports this idea that as soon as you start getting onto the cloud, you start being surprised by how much more flexible your IT organization is. And I think one really important thing about thinking about it in terms of let's build a cloud-based business is that adopting cloud computing is really concrete. It's something you can take to your IT manager and just say, hey, I want to use cloud computing. By the way, it's going to be cheap. It's a nice sell, right? And you can get started on that. You can get started on it like tomorrow. But if you go to your IT manager and you say, I think we need to increase our level of business agility, it's very abstract. And your IT manager might be someone who understands what that means, but maybe not, right? Maybe they don't really understand the benefits of being agile. So I think that thinking in terms of let's adopt the cloud can actually be a great way to actually just try to get your feet wet and get started along the path towards agility. The other thing is I think we've had Agile in development for a long time, again, and we've had this idea of business agility. But I think to have real business agility, you need to be able to say we're Agile in more than just our software development, right? You couldn't claim to have an Agile business if you were only Agile in software development, not Agile in everything else you did. So you've got to get it out of that box. And I think the easiest target to go after is sort of ops, infrastructure, that cloud computing space. It's like this shining example. It's like, again, a real easy sell, real easy payoff, cost payoff that will basically convince anyone, plus all these other agile type payoffs. Once you have 2 parts of your company kind of agile, I think it's going to start spreading faster. It's kind of going to have an exponential influence. And eventually, you can start thinking about, we're going to move our whole business onto the cloud. So the company, again, I worked at, we started with visions of, we're going to run a SaaS product on the cloud. Then we started doing our QA on the cloud. We actually started doing some development on the cloud. All the services we started using internally were on the cloud. So we had our own email and our own website were all on the cloud, right? You start putting more and more and more and more into it because you start seeing how flexible, how agile, how cheap it is. And as more and more and more of your business gets on the cloud, that starts impacting more and more people at your business. So as you move sales tools onto the cloud, salespeople start being impacted by how agile those tools are, right? How agile that support is. You start moving, marketing or finance tools into the cloud. Again, people in those departments start seeing the payoffs of, hey, I can make a change for you really quickly. Hey, we can scale this way more easily, right? Everyone starts getting on board with this idea of, oh, I absolutely need that flexibility. I absolutely need that to deliver value. So it's a good way to kind of spread this like agile bug. So this is kind of, I think, the last time I'm going to talk about like my own personal experience with cloud technology. But at the company I was at, adopting cloud, it had some other kind of agile type impacts as well that I think are hard to predict. We started seeing testing as being more valuable. And yeah, I mean, maybe you'd say, obviously, testing is valuable. Unit testing, obviously valuable. But if you're a dev writing unit tests, it's to get your quality of your code better, right? And that's pretty important to you. But let's say now you're a dev writing unit tests, and if production goes down, your phone rings at 2 a.m. because you're the dev who also is partially responsible for the cloud architecture that your company's built. Well, now tests are really important to you. Like, you're going to write twice as many tests when your sleep can be deprived if your tests fail than if not. And I think that that's something that actually starts happening as soon as you start getting involved in the cloud, is you start sharing responsibility amongst people, and you start empowering people to use the cloud, but that new responsibility and that new empowerment has consequences. And for our development team, it meant that if something bad happened in production, they couldn't just say, whatever, it's QA's problem, or oh, that's the server guy's problem. It was everybody's problem, and that actually caused code quality to go up. It caused test coverage to go up. People took more responsibility. People started building more incrementally as well. So, again, make small changes, reduce the risk, because if something bad happens, I'm more personally responsible. We started to automate everything, and I'm going to talk a bit about that as well. But when you're deploying in the cloud, again, you begin to see how easy it is to make changes. All that freedom actually, even though you can make a lot of changes, you don't want to be constantly churning, like making millions of changes all the time. You want each thing to become easier the more you do it. I guess that's the definition of automation, right? So, as an example, your sales guys come to you and say, we need more power on the website. We're getting tons of traffic on the website, the sales website. So, okay, I'm going to use my cloud console and I'm going to add a machine into the cluster, whatever. It takes me 20 minutes. If the guy comes to you again the next day and says, hey, remember when you said you give me more power? Well, I need more and more power. So you do it again for 20 minutes, right? That's a candidate for automation. Making that change, that incremental change, you should just automate that. So the sales guy can just push a button. He can improve his own website performance. So I guess every bit of agility you start to see from the cloud, you want to start automating it and putting it in the hands of the users. And that's something that, again, it becomes self-evident as soon as you're on the cloud, because people will immediately start asking you, can you please change something? I know it's easy for you to change that. Could you please change it? Or you start thinking, you know what, I'm going to want to change this all the time because I have this amazing freedom. I better write a script for that, or I better write a controller for that, or a control panel for that. Being on the cloud helps you realign your goals and redefine success. Yep?
I just want to check what you just said. So are you saying that your salespeople had the ability to spin up new nodes?
Actually,
to increase performance on your website?
We didn't do that specifically for our website, but we did do that for, say, our testers in our QA group. So they could spin up more resources, more powerful machines, or more machines for QA. And when we started, they would actually have to ask the devs, because the developers on the team were familiar with how to use the cloud technology. So people were asking them, I need a new QA environment. And we just decided, let's just quickly build a real rudimentary console. QA guy, now he can start his own QA environment, right? You could, in theory, start putting more in the hands of the sales folks. I'm not sure if I can think of a case where we really did that. You know what, we did let them, our sales folks, they did demos, right? So they would go on site and do a demo. They could actually create nodes on the cloud specifically for a demo. So, and we trust them not to click 1 million times or something like that, make 1 million nodes. But even the problem of, oh, the sales guys have created too many nodes, it's costing us a fortune. Well, maybe we can automate that. So maybe there's a cleanup job we build that cleans up unused nodes or something like that. And I think you can start really thinking about let's automate a solution to every problem our business has. And that sounds crazy when you're not on the cloud. When you're on the cloud, it's not so crazy, because you can push so much into these very flexible resources you have, whether they're computing resources or if they're services. Is that a good answer? Cool. So I was going to mention, realigning goals and redefining success. So again, I talked about how our development team, they weren't successful unless something was in production. Just committing to Subversion, that was not a success, right? Or saying, hey, we branched Subversion today. Woo! But then not a success. You need to actually put the code into the hands of the users, and they need to like it. And then that's a success, right? And just setting that expectation for the whole company about what success is going to be. And we even actually started to say, we wanted we were a startup company, so we could do this, but we want all of our developers to actually think about financial implications of what they're doing. So, our startup company needs to become profitable. If you start writing code that increases our costs, doubles our costs on the cloud, that's not cool, because we don't have a lot of money. So start thinking about how much this is going to cost, in terms of dollars. And I think, again, that's not something that a lot of development teams worry about. But when you start actually defining success as, hey, success is a feature that works and users like it, and it's in production, and it doesn't cost us a fortune, then you start getting so much more value out of your teams. You get what you measure. I think that's something a lot of Agile people probably already believe in. Again, you can kind of tie that back to cloud really easily, because again, it comes down to cloud is all about flexibility and keeping costs down. You can start measuring those things and giving them this feedback to your team. I guess the last thing, I'll mention a couple more things since I think I have time. In Agile, we talk a lot about taking an end-to-end story and bite off small chunks, right? Write your user story so that you can do it in a day or two. Don't write a user story that takes 6 months, because you can't put that into an iteration, right? So small chunks. As soon as we started using cloud computing, our chunks automatically started getting smaller. Why was that? What actually happened is the chunks became larger. So the developer was going to deliver a feature. Well, now instead of just writing the code and maybe the tests, now they had to think about, and I need to write a script that will put this feature into production, and I need to write some test scripts that are going to load test this on a production environment clone. And so they kind of had more to do. And so that meant that you couldn't afford to take on a 5-day task. You could only take on a 1-day task, because you were responsible for more than just the code. And it actually worked out really well for our team. Just people generally taking off the smallest possible pieces of what we needed to get done and delivering them completely to the user. That was a lot more effective than 5-day or week-long or 2-week-long chunks of code going out once every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks. So what if your whole business moved into the cloud? And I started thinking about this question when I was writing this presentation. Would it be so different than me saying, what if your whole business was agile? Like, there's a lot of overlap, I think, between saying, what if your whole business was based in the cloud, and what if your whole business was agile? And so I just started dreaming, like, how would I build a company around cloud computing? Like, what would sort of the fundamental things I would do look like? And I thought, I'd start off by kind of, and this is something we did in our startup, let's establish like this vision for the team. And the vision is like, what our service and our product is going to look like for our customers, and kind of how we're going to get code written and deployed and into customers' hands. And I would say, everyone needs to understand this vision, and we all need to share in the responsibility of this vision. And if there were problems along the way, like, let's say, a developer wrote some code that uses a database, and then that database RPM won't install on the Linux machine or something. Instead of blaming it on the sysadmin guy or the vendor, I would say, we're going to use the cloud, so I'm going to expect creative solutions to those kinds of problems. So you're totally empowered to change the operating system on the cloud if you want, or pick a different database. And I would start, building an agile process that is all about putting ideas into production. And I think the agile process that I've used in the past, it wasn't about putting ideas into production. It was about like putting features into code, or maybe putting features into production. But it's never been about putting ideas into production. And an idea isn't always a feature. So, an idea is like any idea someone in your company comes up with. Your CEO could come and say, we want to launch this marketing campaign, or we have this great idea to reduce the amount of support calls we're getting. Could you get that idea into production in a day? Does your process support putting that idea into production in a day, even if it has nothing to do with your software? I would start by rewarding and measuring all the right things. So that would be, rewarding getting things into production, getting things into customers' hands. Make everybody responsible for costs. Make everybody responsible for delivering user value, into the hands of the actual users, and trusting people to invest their time wisely, as long as they have all the facts. So, trusting that a developer is not going to spend too much time on optimizing a database when they know that they can add a second database node to the cluster for like pennies. Automate everything as a way to accelerate innovation. So, don't be spending all your time supporting day-to-day business processes. Don't be spending all your time fixing, doing things for support calls or custom work to support your sales team. Automate all that stuff so you have your time free to innovate. And I'd say, make eliminating business processes as important as features. And again, that's not something that that I think a lot of companies do. If I can say, I'm going to save sales guy a day of his time every week, right? That's like a business process I can eliminate at my company. That has a real value to my company. That should be as important as any feature I could put into our software, right? Or at least I should consciously weigh, like, what's going to be better for my company? Putting a feature into production, or putting some tool onto the cloud, or tweaking some script so that sales guys' time is saved. And actually, like, Amazon has this, I think it's like a blog post somebody at Amazon wrote about this thing that they call heavy lifting. And so when they first started thinking about inventing the Amazon cloud, it was because, they obviously ran this like bookstore thing, right? A long time ago. And they were finding that they were doing development and testing, and then they were code complete. And then they did this thing they called heavy lifting before it went into prod, before it went to the hands of the users. And it was like, what is the heavy lifting? And heavy lifting was like a billion things. It was like everything from negotiating contracts to writing documentation to again, buying servers to configuring networks to opening firewalls, like just a billion things that they had to do before the features were going into the hands of the users. And the reason one of the main reasons they invented Amazon Web Services Cloud was they wanted to get rid of the heavy lifting. They were like, why are we doing all these other processes all the time, like setting up servers and configuring firewalls over and over again before we can put our features into production? Why can't that just be smooth? And I think if I was building a company around cloud computing, have courage to do dramatic things. And courage is an agile principle, but I think a lot of what we think of as courage now is like the courage to refactor, right? Like I tell developers, like, oh yeah, have the courage to just go in there and like mix it up, like refactor that code a bit. And that's great. Like it's good to be brave. You have your tests, and I'm going to refactor some code. But how many companies have the courage to do something that might impact their users? Companies like Facebook do. They'll release broken features, and then they'll realize they're broken like three hours later, and they'll roll them back. That was really brave, right? That actually like touched people outside the company. Refactoring code, not as brave. So it's kind of like this, like, we'll have even more courage. We'll have the courage to do something that could be like business changing for us. Don't reinvent the wheel and maximize the work not done. Maximize work not done, I think, something the cloud is really good at. And this was also something I think that was thought of in Agile a lot. Like, don't do gold plating. Don't waste time doing something that you've already done in the past, right? You reuse code. It's like if you're lazy, you do really well. I think a lot of developers are lazy people at heart. They start writing code because they don't want to do something twice. Right? I'll write a script for that. I'll write code for that. In the cloud, it's like the lazy person's dream. It's like I have way more power to do way less work, and that's awesome for business. So you need to empower people with that maxim of like, hey, I want you to come into work today and do less work today. I want to bring people on my team who can think of ways to be lazy during the day because they've gotten all their work done in like half the time. That's an awesome problem to have. Just-in-time everything, disposable everything. I think that's also something that adds a lot of agility. It's like, don't buy a computer until you need a computer. Don't write that code until you need that code. Don't put that feature into production until you need that feature in production. And then anything you do, you should be willing to toss it away. So, I set up a database server. It's broken. Throw it away. Set up another database server. That kind of attitude is something you can have on the cloud. And even using the cloud should be something you treat that way. So, we're going to build something on the Amazon cloud. Oh, Amazon cloud's getting unstable. Let's move it to the Rackspace cloud. Okay, you need to give yourself that level of freedom to basically throw away anything you've done at a moment's notice and basically bootstrap it again at a moment's notice in a just-in-time way. And that's what the cloud's about. It's about putting up a server when you need a server, or putting something out there when you need something out there. And I think that really is like a huge amount of business agility. And then I think lastly, infrastructure is never an excuse. When I thought back to all the companies I've ever worked at, someone's always told me that like, oh, we can't do something, and it was like very often because of infrastructure. So I'll give you an example. Compiling takes an hour. I'm like, well, let's make compiling faster. Well, we can't. Like, that's how fast it is, right? Or that's how fast your computers are. Or, oh, I want to put this code into production today. Oh, we can't do that because we'd have to take the server down, and that would cause an outage, and it's the middle of the day, so sorry, right? So people were like always telling me no. Whenever I wanted to do something agile, it was like, or something awesome, it would be like, oh, within the framework of our awesome agile dev process, yeah, you're totally empowered. But outside of that, no, you're totally not empowered. There's this blocker, and it's called our infrastructure or our user base. So it's about changing all that. So that's kind of just like a vision. You could actually sort of have your core business values kind of surround this idea of like what's awesome about cloud computing and build an awesome company. And people are starting to realize this. IT Policy Compliance Group, that actually sounds like a fake name, but it's real. It's like a bunch of companies like Symantec and, I don't know, some government bodies and a bunch of other companies that kind of come together and they're identifying already, small businesses bad performing organizations, they're only looking to the cloud for cost. But large, awesome, best performing organizations, they're looking for flexibility. They're looking for agility. They want to take advantage of increased speed, business speed. And that's kind of what I'm saying. You know, a lot of people would be surprised by this. Amazon Cloud, it's not all startup companies. I think there's this weird idea that it's all startup companies. More than half of all the resources in the cloud are used by major corporations. Their biggest customers are all major corporations. It's not like the Reddits and the Foursquares, like those aren't major corporations. It's like banks and pharmaceutical companies. They've already clued into this stuff. They're already actually making use of the cloud quite a lot. At least select banks and select pharmaceuticals are. And they're leveraging that competitive advantage, like quietly behind the scenes, to like really hurt their competitors. So I'm kind of coming close to the end of my talk, which is good because I'm an hour and 10 minutes in. One thing I wanted to do before I kind of wrap it up, I looked on the Agile Manifesto site, and there's like this list of Agile principles, right? These are the original founding principles for what got distilled down into the Agile Manifesto. And like if I look at stuff on this list, as somebody who likes cloud computing, I actually started thinking like cloud is really important to do each of these things. Like I want to rapidly deliver useful software. Well, I can rapidly build it without a cloud, but I probably can't rapidly deliver it, or as rapidly deliver it without a cloud. Welcome changing requirements. Again, I can welcome changing requirements to my features, but what if there's a changing performance requirement late in the game? Do I welcome that? Well, probably not without a cloud. Delivering frequently. Again, like delivering. What does delivery mean? Is it actually putting something onto a machine and having it actually in production, or is it just putting it in subversion? Working software as a principal measure of progress. Again, in the past, Agile teams, working software has been like, it passes my tests. But I actually think working software is like, making you money on your servers. Users love it. They use that feature every day. And there's an extra step there after your test pass, and it's like putting it out on a production server environment and supporting it there. And unless you can say, this is in production and we're supporting it sustainably, you don't have working software. Maintain a constant pace, sustainable development. I think the automation features of the cloud, but automating your dev process and automating your business, actually make things way more sustainable for you. You're actually spending way less time supporting the rest of your company, fixing people's computers, or like helping somebody set up, I don't know, a print server, or like, all kinds of things that distract development teams in small and large companies. Those distractions actually start to go away as you automate. Build projects around motivated individuals who should be trusted. Again, I think you can go a lot further than we've gone in the past when you say, hey, we trust you not only with developing code, but with purchasing resources. We trust you as a developer to decide how much cloud computing power you're going to need for this feature. And we're going to trust you as a developer to actually put that in place. Attention to technical excellence, good design, simplicity. These are all things that can be helped on the cloud. I think good design, evolutionary design. You can have an evolutionary design of your infrastructure on the cloud, not something you could have in the past. Adaptation to changing circumstances. Again, so much more opportunity for that on the cloud. Sandhill.com report from just a few months ago. They said the biggest reason organizations are moving to the cloud is business agility. So, I've kind of mentioned this a few times now, but a lot of industry sort of publications and recommendations are starting to sort of see this this trend. So, just to sum up my presentation, and then we can do questions if there are any left. Agile development. I've loved Agile development since Michael mentioned I was a grad student. I actually did one of the earliest master's theses specifically about test-driven design. But I don't think Agile development is worth much alone. Business agility is the new goal. Have agility in your software development teams, but also the rest of your business. Deploying in the cloud, I think, because of all the advantages cloud offers you, is a great way to discover Agile in a new way in your company. Oops. So basically to reboot, Agile adoption, to spread the influence of Agile beyond the borders of just your development team. Cloud computing is helping every type of organization, from the giant organization down to the small organization, actually start to remember that technology is an investment in value and differentiation. And that's something that people knew in the 50s when they rolled out computers. It actually happened again, I think, with other innovations. Desktop computers came out in like the late 80s, right? Like commonly in the business world. And same thing, like, wow, we can differentiate our business because we can give desktop computers to our employees and they can be so much more productive. It's going to be amazing. That's where we're at again today. And it's waking people up. And I think adopting cloud really demonstrates that the goal of IT is making ideas real, right? It's taking something that people think of as a business idea. Hey, this is going to really make people happy. Hey, this is really going to sell. And then actually executing on it in an efficient way. That's what IT's always been about. It's not just like yesterday's business at a lower cost, right? It's about innovating. It's about putting an idea out there. And I don't think I've seen as many people start thinking that way from any other innovation in the past 2 decades before cloud computing came along. So that's kind of the end of my talk. Definitely happy to talk about questions. Or if anyone has anything they'd like to add, we have probably 10, 15 minutes left, I think. So, sure, in the back first.
So I was wondering, Agile software Agile.
Yep.
It's a whole bunch of techniques in order, there's like best practices identified, so if you do the Agile methodology, it's going to get your risk for certain things and optimizes your efficiency and ability to adapt.
Yep.
So for business agility, what are the best practices? Like,
sure.
So now you're sold on it.
Yep.
Is there a process around that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple ways to look at that. One is that I actually think a best practice is maybe cloud computing. Like that could be another type of best practice that you adopt in your business or on your development team. But I also think what you want is to start spreading the same principles and the same best practices from development into other parts of the business. And I've talked a lot about like infrastructure today, so I've talked about how we want to not just make software development, but also IT and operations more agile. You could say things like, we should do pairing on our operations team. You could say, we're going to do more testing of our cloud deployments, right? Test-driven development of our cloud deployments. That stuff's totally possible. But you can actually spread that to the whole business. So like, I actually have like a contingency slide. Oops, I kind of skipped it, but. Oops. Just figure out how to do this. Does that work? Yeah, so I've actually thought a lot about, could we use Agile practices on a sales team? Coming out of a lean startup background, so like, what if we started doing things like pair programming our salespeople, right? What if we started having a daily stand-up meeting for our salespeople and a story wall? And salespeople came to the office every day and they took a story off the wall and it's like, I have to cold call 8 people today. And it's like, I have to pair with Joe and like, we're gonna get on the phone together and we're gonna like, work out an awesome script for our calls and we're gonna cold call people and sell our product. Things like time boxing, collective ownership, measuring velocity, right? Retrospectives, like it's kind of the same practices that we do on dev teams. You can translate them to something like sales, which I think is radically different from software development, fairly easily. And it actually surprises me that this isn't done more. I didn't want it to be the focus of my talk today, which is why I actually took this out. But, cloud computing and adopting it at your organization, I think will start people thinking this way. They'll start thinking about how, hey, these practices are working so well for dev and for ops and infrastructure, and this new flexibility is empowering so much of our business. What else can we learn? But I don't see a reason why you couldn't actually do like a fully agile, company that did many of the programming type practices everywhere. First the fellow in dark and then the fellow in blue.
Just a practical question. So if I wanted a Windows 2008 server,
Yep.
SQL server on it, how do am I actually buying the virtual hardware, or can I buy the whole package?
For sure, that's a good question. And you know, I kind of should apologize. I could have maybe put a bit more background into how cloud kind of works into the slide deck. You know, there's no quick answer because there are a lot of sort of cloud offerings out there right now by a lot of different companies. But on something like Azure, which is the Microsoft public cloud, you can basically either programmatically, so like with a script or a command line tool, or through a web console, just start up a machine, like starting a virtual machine in the cloud, and then you can log into it and start installing stuff. You could actually remote desktop into it. So in the case of your Windows 2008 server with SQL Server, you could basically go into the web console and say, I need a 8-core, 20 gigabyte of RAM, 2008 server, install SQL Server, install IIS, go, and like a minute later you can remote desktop to this machine, and it's out there in the cloud and it's running the stuff you wanted running on it. And then you can install your own software or do what you wanted with that machine.
Okay, so Azure would be Microsoft type products, and other companies would offer different
exactly.
Unix or whatever.
And there is sort of like, there's a broad range of offerings. So there are public clouds like Azure and Amazon, where kind of anybody can just go and start up any amount of computing resources they want. There are also private clouds, so you can work with a private cloud company to like sort of like reserve you space, and you can use portions of it. There's sort of like there's infrastructure level offerings, so like Azure and Amazon, they give you access to like basically virtualized hardware. So you're getting like CPUs and disk space and RAM, right? But other cloud offerings are actually more of like platforms. So they may give you like a Java enterprise platform, and you can just kind of like say, I need this much capacity. I need 10 million web hits per second capacity of a Java web stack, and they would just give you that. And you don't even need to know how much disk space or how much CPU it takes, right? It's totally abstracted from you. So there is sort of that wide variety of service offerings out there. But that's what's so exciting about the cloud, is that there's so many offerings and there's so many services that are taking advantage of those offerings, that once your company starts being bought into the idea of, we're going to try and do everything through the cloud, I think most companies are amazed at how quickly they can turn around ideas, how quickly they can cycle something from inception through really quick planning and iterative development and deployment, matter of days for like almost any idea. Even crazy ideas like, let's digitize our backlog of 100 years of newspapers. It's just like turn around in like 4 days. It's crazy. You had a question too.
There was a bullet point of
Yep.
self-organized teams.
Yeah.
How does it fit in the current structure? Let's say upper level management, middle level management, and then groups, teams, departments.
For sure. I think it's a broad topic. I actually think like the best word that describes it is DevOps. So if you've been following the DevOps movement, it basically talks about that specific thing. So for those of you who don't know a lot about DevOps, it's about building a sort of a culture of shared responsibility for development, ops, which is sort of operations, sort of all of IT, and it holistically includes like IT managers and QA and sort of other roles. It's about sort of aligning the goals and vision and incentives for those people, and creating a mixed team, like a self-organizing team. And so on like a DevOps team, you just kind of populate it with people from all these different departments or different areas, and they self-organize. So you might actually have someone from ops writing code one day. You might have a developer running scripts on a Linux box, because they can basically self-organize how they want, and they trust each other to make the best decisions possible and to build a sustainable plan and so on. But I could probably talk for an hour about sort of how to build that kind of self-organizing team. If you're really interested in in that aspect of it, do a little bit of research on the DevOps community, or go check out a meeting of Vancouver DevOps. It's a user group here in town, and a lot of passionate people are out there about building self-organizing ops, dev type teams. Sure.
So what's the friction if you, what are you likely to encounter if you say, we've got a pile of servers with all sorts of stuff running, we want to go to the cloud?
Yeah, there's no one answer there. I mean, for some companies it's really easy because they don't have a lot of, it totally depends, you know. What kind of risks are your company willing to take? Are there legal barriers? So, you know, if you're hosting medical data or financial data, it becomes slippery from a legal perspective about like who owns the data because it's not on a server that you own. You know, there's questions about you know, the culture of your company. Are they willing to sort of give up some control that they previously had, right, at the hardware level? You know, I think there's no single answer, but I think everyone has room to take some cloud computing. So even if you're at the most risk-averse, legally impaired, culturally impaired company in the world, there's still something you can do with cloud computing to get it going. You can say, you know what, we're just going to do our QA on the cloud, and we're not going to put any real customer data in place in that environment. We're just going to try it out for a while because it's cheaper. And that might be the way to get going. And I think a lot of times once these companies get started, they become bigger users. And in that Amazon article I mentioned where they talked about banks and pharmaceuticals, they actually specifically say that many of those companies got started with experiments and they became addicted and they started becoming huge purchasers. Because the executives start seeing the value, right? And that's all it takes. Like, once people kind of way up in your company start seeing big returns, they get excited and they'll make the other problems go away for you. So they'll negotiate the legal hazards for you, or they'll negotiate the cultural hazards for you. So, you know, complicated answer, sorry, but I do think almost anyone can overcome the friction, even in the worst of scenarios. Let's go outside and then you. Sorry, I'm just picking at random. Yeah.
Back to your just-in-time slide there.
Yeah.
Changing platforms.
Yeah.
No, they're quite different, and I can't imagine that would be easy. Are there any strategies you would recommend for protecting yourself against that? And are there any tools that you know, like a cross-compilation tool?
For sure. I don't want to talk about, I don't know of any like cross-compilation type tools, but I can talk about practices a bit, and that might answer your question well enough. So, I mean, the first step is, I think, really thinking in terms of, let's not do anything that we can't do iteratively. Let's not do anything that we can't do in small, manageable bites. When it comes to, you know, not coupling yourself to a specific platform or a specific, you know, cloud platform, the just-in-time part is what makes it disposable later. So on Amazon, for example, you can bring up a virtual machine, then you can invest months in configuring it, right? That's no longer disposable, because as soon as you throw that virtual machine away, you're going to have to bring up another one and invest months in configuring it again. Instead of doing that, what you could do is you could automate the configuration of a virtual machine, right? As sort of maybe end-to-end chunks, like one feature at a time, or you can split it into modules, maybe architect it as a set of services instead of one sort of major giant feature. That's going to give you a lot more flexibility, because if that machine goes away, you know, bring up another machine, your automation can reconstruct it for you with low investment, or you can, you know, if you've architected it as a set of services, well, maybe you can reuse some of the services, re-engineer one of the other services, rebuild another service at a lower cost. For tools like Chef and Puppet are kind of two big tools used in the cloud that basically automate provisioning of servers, regardless of sort of the infrastructure they're on. So if you're kind of curious about how to sort of decouple your infrastructure from a platform, look into Chef or Puppet. They're sort of, they're pretty well-known products now. Hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the middle.
It was kind of related question. Are you using any cloud management software like RightScale? And dependent question, what's your approach to scale up, scale down, automatical scale up, scale down?
Yeah, that's a lot of questions, right? So I have used RightScale. Amazon has their own stuff they're building both in beta and publicly. So they announced like CloudFormation now, which lets you save like a pre-configured set of cloud servers and things like that. And then Chef and Puppet as well can basically let you kind of like automate the building of your cloud and then kind of execute it somewhere. So yeah, I've used a bunch of different tools. They're all pretty good. I couldn't really say, like, it totally depends on your situation, what maybe the best tool for the job is. And the same thing for scaling, sadly. Like, what's the best approach for scaling? The answer is it depends. Like, what are you scaling? How big do you need to scale it? How quickly does it need to scale? How elastic does it need to be? What are the constraints of the product you're scaling? Maybe we could talk offline if you have some specific questions. Like if you want to talk specifically about relational database scaling on Amazon, we could talk about that. Not everyone might care. So I'll leave that out. Yeah.
Just not related to Agile, but what's your take on hosting data on the cloud, and in terms like how flexible it is, to actually migrate, to cloud. So say for example we have Oracle. DB right now we host it, but in terms of features, do we have equivalent on either Azure or Amazon, or also what about you have very critical financial data? Is it really reliable, or can we just test that?
So I'll speak to those two questions separately. The startup I started, we actually did host like medical data, so patient, like government regulated medical data. We hosted that data on Amazon. So, and we were approved by all of the necessary, like HIPAA and other legal checks, and we had certifications and stuff approved. So, is it possible? I think yes, for any level of sensitivity. The only thing we could never get around is like cross-border type stuff. So we couldn't host a patient who lived in Canada's data in the States or vice versa. We had some trouble with that. More around US people, in hosting US people's data in Canada than vice versa. But there can be some trickiness around that. But I think it's very doable with financial data and with medical data. The hardest part is basically architecting your cloud infrastructure to be highly fault tolerant, obviously. That's the main concern, right? What happens if we lose all this data? What if it gets corrupted? Like, what are the dangers? So cloud tools generally give you the ability to decide and incrementally build how much reliability and fault tolerance you need. So you can invest very little, like some companies did, and then when Amazon goes down in one availability zone, they lose all their data and they get really upset. But if you invest more, you can build your own sort of level of fault tolerance and reliability on top of almost any of the cloud platforms that will be extremely survivable. So you can have data being mirrored in other countries at other data centers, and you can have encryption on your data, and you can have encryption on top of your encryption, and you can have RAID as well as mirroring on multiple machines, and you can do so many levels of redundancy and security that you can build a system that's extremely secure and fault tolerant. It's just a matter of how much you want to invest in terms of time. But I do think the cloud is a nice way to do it. It puts the tools in your hands to do it, and it puts the tools in your hands to do it incrementally in an agile way. Whereas if you want to do that in your data center, it's not going to be agile. It's not going to be incremental. It's going to be expensive. So up here first, then in the back.
A practical question. So when using cloud computing to do the QA, so how flexibility cloud computing can provide, such as reconfigure system, installing tool, and bring up and down, those kind of activity? How much flexibility?
I can't actually, I can, how do I want to say this? It's the greatest thing about cloud computing. It's extremely good at that. So one thing we did at my startup company is we actually, we would record all transactions against our system during the day. So real time, updates to our database or HTTP incoming requests, then we could actually literally play back that day again. And we could play it back at an increased speed if we wanted. So we could actually take all of yesterday's traffic, clone our live environment, and play it back in an hour on that environment. Like play it back. And like exactly as though it was happening. That's like extremely powerful. So you could make a code change and you could see, is there a performance impact? Or you could, you could do all kinds of A/B testing and stuff like that with real data kind of being played back through. But also cloning environments or reconfiguring systems. Again, it's extremely powerful for that. On Amazon, cloning a disk is like 1 second, even if it's many terabytes. Like it's extremely fast. And I don't even know how they do it behind the scenes. I think it's because all the data is already sort of kind of being real-time cloned on multiple blocks or something like that. But you can do that kind of thing very, very quickly. And again, if you take an incremental approach to sort of like building out your system and your configuration, I think you can make it very flexible. So, has anyone ever heard of like feature toggling, right? Like it's like you build, switches in your application to turn features on and off, and then you can basically build automation to like, sort of quickly configure different toggles in different environments. Very, very powerful. I don't think anything's as good as like a public cloud like Amazon for rapidly configuring many, many, many environments for QA.
So those operation, transaction, does it cost you extra, or do you have to pay extra?
Everything, you pay for everything.
Okay.
Anything you do, it's like metered. It's like turning on the faucet at home or plugging in like a fan into the electrical outlet. They meter everything. Disk space, CPU time. But the thing is, the rate is like tenths of a cent per hour sometimes. So it takes a lot to get it ahead. Amusing story, we had one of our developers one time. We were basically building out some cloud infrastructure, and we had concerns about the disk speed. So we thought, like the writes and reads from this cloud disk, we don't know if it's going to be fast enough. So we said, okay, go ahead and test it. Our developers were like, they were empowered to do that. They could start up some instances and test the disk speed. So developer goes away and comes back and says, I wrote a script to test the disk speed. It writes 1 million files. Then it deletes 1 million files. Here's the thing, we were paying for those writes, right? So actually had him like I don't know, 1 million cents is still a lot of money, right? So we actually called Amazon like the same day. And we were like, yeah, one of our developers made a horrible mistake and like did $10,000 worth of disk writes and reads today to test disk performance. Like, we're really sorry. And they actually forgave us the cost. Like they said, oh, like, okay, no problem. You won't see it on your bill. They waived the disk reads and writes. So I guess that's a disadvantage to empowering developers to actually like manage that sort of thing. You can definitely incur costs. But it becomes part of your culture, I think, right? With great power comes great responsibility. Someone in the back had a question first, didn't they?
It was just a caveat to the earlier question on data privacy. So it is a consideration if you're hosting any data in a U.S. data center that it is subject to Patriot Act.
Yep.
So, if you do have customer PI, you need to be very careful about using some services. There are ways around it.
My recommendation, like what we did is we hired like a third-party consulting company to basically recommend and validate what we were doing, and then we became certified in as many ways as possible. And so we just absorbed the expense of getting those certifications and having those audits done as a way to make sure that we weren't tripping ourselves up legally in the United States or Canada. Especially at a startup company, like you don't have like lawyers that are very good, so you need to hire somebody to look into that for you.
Do we need a lawyer kind of cloud?
Yeah, actually, you know what? At the Lean startup that we went to in May, there was actually like a lawyer cloud guy who's starting up like a law cloud app where you can just like post your like legal questions or contracts you want built, and like this cloud of like crowdsourced lawyer knowledge.
Contractually.
Contractually, yeah. It's a contractually.com or something like that.
No, actually contractually. Lease actually, it's domain.
Okay.
I don't know how to.
Anyway, hilariously, Yes. We're almost out of time, right? I think.
Yes.
Maybe we'll call it quits. And if anyone else wants to ask me stuff, I'm here today and tomorrow about my talk or about just cloud stuff in general. Happy to talk about it. Also, one last plug for Vancouver DevOps, Calgary DevOps, Vancouver Agile, Calgary Agile, and Powerworks. Keep us all in mind. Thanks, everybody.